warning you.
You know we're gonna bear you.
I'm warning you, Bear.
Come on, Mr. Grobet.
I warned you.
Watch out, Bear!
A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines pertaining to the American judicial system. A Lesson Before Dying follows the fictional story of Jefferson, who is the only surviving witness to a shootout at a liquor store and is wrongfully accused of murder. Jefferson is a young black man and has little formal education, which makes him subject to the damaging stereotypes cast on him by white people in the Deep South during the 1940s. His aunt, Miss Emma, enlists the help of Grant Wiggins, who is a local school teacher. She hopes Grant can teach Jefferson to die with dignity and break the cycle of disenfranchisement. Racism has been a part of American history since its founding and has been interpreted in many works of literature and art. The American judicial system is meant to create order and find justice for all people. However, A Lesson Before Dying shows how due process applies to some better than others. The United States judicial system must eliminate racial bias while conducting a trial so that every person of color in America can receive due process. The failed system that wrongly accused Jefferson still remains in certain ways through prosecutors, judges, and the laws themselves. Ernest Gaines wants to put a spotlight on the difficulties faced by black people in the rural South, as well as the encompassing issue of discrimination and the justice system's role in racial inequality. This quote shows the heavy racial bias of the prosecution, judge, and jury that influenced the ruling, disallowing an impartial, just decision. Jefferson was not innocent until proven guilty. It was assumed that he was a criminal because of his race. He never received the due process given to all white citizens. Racial bias in the judicial system is still faced by people of color today because of policies and laws that allow discrimination and profiling. Law enforcement policies value revenue over public safety, allowing courts to profile and discriminate. According to the investigation of the Ferguson Police Department in 2015 by the Department of Justice, Ferguson police have been known to lurk in areas where they suspect crime to take place. Partly as a consequence of FBD priorities, many officers appear to see some residents, especially those who live in predominantly African American neighborhoods, as potential offenders and sources of revenue rather than citizens to be protected. The number of arrests, citations issued, incarcerations, etc. are viewed as progress. This encourages the police force to target certain groups and be more aggressive in order to comply with productivity standards. Black people are specifically targeted and are held under suspicion without any proof of crimes being committed. The revenue-driven department seeks out any inkling of disobedience or noncompliance that would enable them to make more arrests, therefore more money. A majority of judicial power seems to be in the hands of one race in particular, which allows a disproportionate amount of perspectives that can prove invaluable during a trial. This lack of diversity in the population of such powerful people means there is hardly a chance for the thoughts of someone who isn't a white male. The bias of jurors, judges, and prosecutors is backed by policies that reinforce systematic racism. In this example, the court had ruled that if a police officer illegally stops an individual without reasonable suspicion and discovers an arrest warrant for that individual, then the previous illegal stop is legitimized and any evidence seized during the stop can be used in court. This decision issued a serious blow to Americans' Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. Without reasonable suspicion, police officers are relying on their intuition rather than the evidence to select people for traffic stops, frisks, etc. Of course, police must make inferences to do their jobs, but there is overwhelming evidence that the unlawful authority given to police has opened the door to racial discrimination and brutality. During the legal process, race seems to be the factor that can change how the law represents the accused. In theory, without race complicating a trial, prosecutors, judges, and jurors can remain impartial, making judgments based off of crimes alone, which reduces bias. However, race cannot be completely disregarded during a trial. Excluding evidence relating to race would be nearly impossible and not in the best interest of the defendant. Ignoring an important part of someone's identity while investigating them doesn't tell the full story. While everyone has biases, bringing in different types of people into the courtroom keeps one particular perspective from swaying the outcome of the trial.
Not at all. There's a lot of situations where people that look like me, act like me, they end up getting longer sentences. They are not treated well within the judicial system. My aunt is an attorney, and she works for people who have been wrongfully convicted. I've seen how those cases go, so I see that there's a lot of prison systems and judges where they're just trying to fill a quota, they're just trying to make margins. That's all they really care about.
I think a lot of where racial bias happens in the judicial system happens in the court system, and that looks at the punishments that some people get as opposed to other people get based on, I think, sometimes their race, but at the same time I think it's a little bit more of their race, but also a little bit of where they grew up.
I think that one effective way of lessening the bias is for young people like us to be more educated and informed about the officials that we're electing, because those are the officials that are going to be putting forth legislation and policies that are implemented in court systems and implemented by the police.
We as a society need to have mandatory sentence. Right now it's a wide spectrum, and so the judge has pretty much carte blanche to be able to punish however they want to punish. If you get locked up with drugs, if it's about this certain amount of drug, or if it's this specific drug, you get 5 to 10 years or whatever that is. So we narrow the spectrum of what a judge can issue as punishment.
More representation within who becomes an attorney. More attorneys of color will probably help us out way more. More judges of color will help us out way more.
Diversity is the key to equity, and the lack of diversity in the trial depicted in A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines shows what happens to justice when power is put in the hands of just one type of person with one particular view. The struggles faced by African Americans in A Lesson Before Dying are gravely similar to that of real life in the 1940s. Since that time, America has come so far, but the law still does not ensure equal protection like it states in the Constitution. Racism is showing in the form of judicial policies and is often excused because of how it benefits the courts. Including more people of color will check the bias currently dominating our judicial system.